Alexin, and I have my tea here. This is lesson 181. Please excuse me if my voice gets a little rough or if I steal little sips of tea, sneak them behind the microphone. I've had a few questions, so this will be a question answer lesson 181. It's on sigils, and even more, I would say, because of the questions I'm answering, the specific email I received. How we trust our intuition when we're listening to other people who are expressing themselves as guides and teachers. So the first question in this little email, that's a really long lesson title, by the way. It should just be shortened to something like Intuition and Sigils or something like that. But so the first question was, are there only two kinds of sigils, spirit and intentional? I was told there are only two. No. Right? So already you're asking this question, and I think it's because you have a very intuitive, a very insightful and internal response. You are your own truest guide. And so now you're questioning the validity of a statement like that. Always be questioning the validity of everything, not just the doubtful things, but maybe even more so the things that you are more likely to confirm in yourself. When we have those confirmed self-biases, question those things as well. But I would say no. And you're likely asking the question because you felt that internal no inside of yourself. I'm not sure where someone would come across an interpretation of symbol energy sourcing that's that biased or self-limiting, saying there's only two types of sigils. That seems like something when you find these maybe well-intended but not always less than ignorant individuals seeking to sell magic. You see a lot of that, which, by the way, you can't. That's not how magic is transmitted. It simply isn't. So, but you see a lot of when people are trying to make money, profitize things, profitize even, say, a YouTube channel or a Patreon account, or become, a social influencer of some kind on Instagram or Twitter. You have to be aware of that. There's a lot of monetizing going on with a lot of these things, even if it's not overt, even if it's not completely clear that that's what someone's doing. They could be. And if they are, then these are the kind of blanket statements you'll get, these kind of quick self-help statements of, I'm right, someone else is wrong, there's only two kinds of things, this and that. And you're going to question it. And that's good that you're questioning it. Questioning it says, that doesn't sound to my trained occultist ear like a very valid statement. So, like saying coven magics aren't real, but voodoo is, or voodoo magics aren't real, but Western occultism and, maybe just pure Hermetic law form is, or, maybe Golden Dawn magic is real, but Rosicrucianism isn't real. Of course not. Of course, the instinctual reaction from a wisely trained mind, a mind of which we're seeking mastery over ourselves, is always going to hear that as worth a grain of salt. And understand that anyone who makes any sort of a claim, there's only two versions of a thing, this and that's how it is. It's very convenient, maybe too convenient. So no, kind of goes without saying, right? When we talk to individuals like this who just lump everything into lazy labels, or easily digestible formats and groups of things, they're doing that because they want it to be taken up by you quickly. They want it to feel good for you. They want you to have that endorphin rush, that little adrenaline rush, maybe a little serotonin rush. Oh, this is a simple thing. My brain just picked it up and now I know it and this is the way it is. Does that feel good? Yes. Should it feel good? No. You should be seeking. You should be questioning. You should be asking. It shouldn't be that easy. It shouldn't be easy to digest big concepts, big ideas. And, not that spontaneous evolution doesn't happen in magic. It absolutely does. But there's nothing wrong with slowing down to really digest meat for men instead of milk for babes, right? So if someone says there's only spirit sigils and chaos sigils, no, absolutely not accurate. Not when we're talking about real magics or real occultism in the sense of what I discuss on this channel. So when we hear those statements, we reflect, hopefully as occultists, we then immediately begin reflecting on the naive innocence or, the false bravado of those sources that are trying to convey things to us in these formats to oversimplify rather than seek or to demand more, work of us intuitively, intelligently. A wise guide makes you work hard because they're not trying to make it easy. And they demand that you delve, that you understand, that you describe for yourself. Not that it needs to be difficult, but that it should be challenging. If you're not being challenged, it's just like building muscles, right? When you go to the gym, if you're not challenging those muscle groups, they're not going to get bigger. So always looking for more, always asking the next question, never just accepting that there's two types of anything, this kind and that kind. That's not a good relativistic, even on the material plane perspective of the greater whole to have of the dynamic of life that you're currently in. This and that is simply not reality. And it's not a reality that will ever be helpful to you or anyone around you. It's inaccurate, or it's simply less than open-mindedly balanced. Right? We seek to be open-minded in our perceptions and balanced in our craft work, and the great work. And so there are many different kinds of sigils. I kind of turn this simple question into something much bigger, but I see these sorts of questions a lot. And what they're hinting at, that shadow beneath the surface, is what you actually want to deal with and recognize in ourselves and in those around us. So no, there's not just two types of sigils. I don't know who might have told you that. Perhaps you were listening to something that was categorizing sigils into two general groups, like saying found versus made sigils, like here's two types, and it was just a convenient way to describe that larger concept. I'm not trying to bash anyone who was maybe doing that, although both are always found and made in a sense, and you can get into that yourself. You could chase that line of thought. But say like a totem, a spirit, an alchemical sigil, a techne sigil, a result sigil, a seal, a key. See, there's a lot of kinds of sigils, even in specified sigils. So when you say, are there just spirit and intentional? No, that simply isn't accurate. There are a lot of kinds of sigils, right? That could be found in a grimoire, or above a doorway, or within a piece of highly layered symbolic occult artwork, for instance. And then versus maybe the secondary group of a sigil that you yourself create, make, set, charge, describe, will. And there are different forms of those as well. There's not just one form of those. But say like those used in chaos magic or in intentional result magics. If that's what you mean, if what someone was trying to say was there's sigils that are already made and that there's sigils that you make, in a lot of ways that's very accurate. But if someone's saying there's just spirit sigils and then intentional sigils, that's a wildly inaccurate perception of an entire world full of occult magics. So no, there aren't just, spirit and chaos magic sigils. There's a lot of different types, as there are, different formats of how we as individuals and cultures employ iconographic, energetic magics. So anything that is a symbol in a way is a sigil. A sigil is a symbol that can be picked up by the mind. So in that definition, you see how broad that is. And a little more layer to that definition would say picked up by the mind as descriptive in a particular way, or as defining certain parameters, or instructive in a particular way, which is not always the case, but can be. Some of the most dangerous sigils are those that are not formally instructive or descriptive. It can cause a lot of harm. So, but something, a visual symbol picked up by the mind that's going to have an influence on the subtle and or subconscious energies of the perceiver, right? So sigils are important in magic. Understanding them perhaps is even more so important, I would say, than using them. in magic, you don't have to use sigils. When you really start getting into your own energy and the fluidity of forms, you don't have to use a sigil to get things done. But I do hear them described a lot too, again, by people who try to sell magic, which again, that simply isn't how these energies are conveyed. It isn't. You cannot sell a magic lesson or a technique of creating a chaos sigil and have handed someone the keys to the kingdom. That's not how magic works. There's something to be said for, the presence, being within the presence of the great, the avatars or the great masters, and how these things, a lot of these energies are transferred in certain channels. So if someone's selling magic, they're probably going to say things like this: there's just chaos sigils, just spirit sigils, and they're quick and easy. And this is how you use them. Using them is more important than understanding them. I would say all of that is very harmful and wildly inaccurate. Can they be very fast working when used correctly? Absolutely, yes. I would say yes. And some people might have a perception of making and using them as somehow being simpler than, say, like a full circle ritual or evocation ritual. And okay, fair enough. But not so for the magi who finds evocation or evolved, ritual simpler and more powerful of a conduit than sigil work. So again, it's a very limiting perspective to say, this is faster and easier than that other thing. Well, maybe to you, maybe not to someone else. And let's start thinking about, the bigger perception around us, right? That we are all a part of. That's the fastest way to actually become more powerful within yourself and to find self-mastery, is in these higher perceptions and perspectives. And they create a better mirror, right? They create the ability for us to really begin to reflect and therefore take control of our own will and apply it in useful ways. So beware anyone or anything that says, with or without claiming to have done these things myself, I'm just going to draw this comparison or conclusion about these two things or these two groups of things, or, why waste 5 years in formal occulted orders. This is the kind of thing you hear from people selling magic, right? You don't need to do that. You can get just as powerful doing this other thing. It's faster and easier. It's far simpler. Just listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. Everyone, it's just the way it is. It's just true. Okay, so many red flags there, right? Anyone who says this is the truth, or this is just the way it is, or I'm about to anger people. Don't you agree with me that people are about to be angry with me? What they're doing is they are sucking you empathetically into a very manipulative frame of mind, which is a form of magic, but they're passive aggressively basically lulling you into a sense of comfort with these blanket statements that when we think intuitively, when we trust ourselves, we can hear just how much dross is hidden in those statements, how much of that lead instead of gold, right? So that unbalanced, egocentric, narrow view of what should be shared perceived realities, assuming of the listener that it'll simply be understood that it's right because this person has passive aggressively said so, has said something like it's true or it's just the way it is. Truth in occultism is a big word. It's a sacred word. It's a big claim, right? Truth is a goal in progress. At the very least, just publicly, we can all admit that it's not a destination that someone else has already found and can then just convey to you at will. So I don't consider myself as knowing the truth. And if I ever did, I hopefully would have enough, retrospective training in my magical background to start questioning what was going on with me, my personality in those moments, because we're seeking truth. We're truth seekers. That's what we have trained ourselves to become. The knight who takes the knee on the hill in the protection of all things that are not ignorance does not also say, I know the truth and this is the truth and the only truth. So that's the mindset of a magician, of an occultist. We have the mindset of the seeker on the great spiral stair. So we don't tend to bandy around the word truth. And we certainly don't say it's just the truth, or it's just the way it is, or this thing is better than that thing, or how convenient. I can tell you that those people are, wasting their time. You can become just as good this fast, easy way, right? There are brilliant thresholds and powerful insights and spontaneous evolution, as I mentioned before. There are things that evolve in us and grow in us and bring us closer to a knowing. Sure, yes. And sometimes we might, and it depends on what tradition you come from, which code words you're going to apply to this sort of an event. But there could be moments of coming into companionship with that knowing. And in a sense, you might call that accessing truth. But you're certainly not going to come back out of it and say that you know everything, you know the truth. It's easy to teach someone else. You can just convey it to them very simply. If an epiphany is hard to convey the feeling and presence of that emotion just consciously to someone else, how are you going to convey having come into access with the divine, which is a code word that someone might use for truth? So I would never claim that anything I know about anything in a given moment is true. I could say I feel that way. I could say that this is my experience of a thing, or that this is the truth-seeking path that I'm on. But no. So does that make other people automatically wrong? No. There's a question in this email that has something to do with, can you just become good at sigils and then you're more powerful than people with formal training for years? Which is odd. Again, I have to wonder who is presenting themselves as even a wise companion for you to be in the presence of their vernacular, to learn and evolve from each other, if these are the sorts of statements that are being made. But so some people partake in formal orders of magic and others don't. I wouldn't say one's more powerful than the other. Some practice their evolution in groups, and others do so alone. Again, I don't know how you equate the two different courses, the two different paths that an individual soul, for lack of a better word, is engaging on, partaking in. But that they're somehow comparable in their usefulness in some way, that just doesn't make sense to me. I don't really know how I would even phrase a response to that, because they're two different paths. They're two different things. The usefulness of a formal order or an informal order, or the usefulness of training magically in a group or alone, that's, if nothing else, is entirely dependent on the magician or on the witch or on the occultist that's doing, either or of those things. It has far more to do with them and far less to do with how they're going about partaking in those techniques. I will say that years of training, when you hear people just discounting, oaths or, informal orders, there are years of initiate training, whether you're a Freemason or a Rosicrucian, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, you have the Silver Star. When someone is just offhandedly saying, oh, you don't need to bother with all that, that's questionable. Because if you don't want to, so be it. That's not your path. And that's not to say you won't get to magic another way and in the way that's best meant for you. Absolutely seek that out. But to just discount the merit of those traditions, to think about it another way, imagine just saying, well, all voodoo isn't real. That's just nonsense. I could teach you how to do everything. A Haitian voodoo priestess spends 10 years learning an oral tradition from, her family. I can teach you that in a minute in this faster, easier way. That sounds very wrong, doesn't it? It sounds very minimalizing and marginalizing of the profound, respect that should be granted to anyone that's using their magic in a way. So it's just, I find that questionable if anyone ever said something about that. Not that it's right or wrong, but it would be a red flag for me of just, you don't need to wait, 4 years of initiate training. That's you can do it this faster way. You can just make a sigil. No, you can't. That's not true. And when I talk about truth, I would say that's not true for me. It's not an authentic or honest assessment of events. It might be what somebody else believes, and conveying your belief of something to someone else is rarely helpful because it's your belief, right? It's not their opinion. It's certainly not a fact, and it's certainly not a truth. So if you're talking to other people in that way, then that's what I would use the code word true and say that's simply not true, quote unquote. It's disingenuous. It's dishonest. It's marginalizing. Something's not quite right there. Why not have the bigger conversation, right? Why not take the time to describe what you actually mean by saying something like that? So I would say that years of training should never just be out of hand, discounted, or overestimated either. As someone who has applied themselves to years of magic training in the right ways, whatever that might mean for them, but in the ways that allowed them access to their energies, is going to have garnered a great deal of experiences, that they can or won't pull insight from, but still contact with those experiences versus someone who hasn't spent years at doing it. And with magic, it is an applied skill. It really is. It is like lifting like free irons at the gym and building that muscle. It's not just snap your fingers, no hard work, and magical prowess just descends on you. That's not how this works, right? I always think that Freemasonic saying, right? No one told you it would be easy. They told you it would be worth it. And there is great truth in that sort of a statement, that it takes practice, that it takes work, that anything worth doing requires that we initialize our will and then repeat those practices in order to grow those magical muscles. So, whether it's practicing habits or practicing ritual energetic growth or practicing our proficiency in different types of craft skills, being able to harness or practicing feeling the subtle energies in those that are around us or in ourselves. These are all things that grow with time, and they're skills that grow with use, with repetition of correct application. So the question here is, can someone who's good at sigils fast be as powerful or more powerful as someone who does years of formal order training? The question is difficult because there are so many red flags in it. Power, there's your red flag. Powerful. Can I be as powerful, or can someone be as powerful? If that's what you're after with occultism, you're already barking up the wrong tree, and it's unlikely you're ever going to gain any authentic and useful skill. You just won't get there with that mindset. You're limiting your access to so many amazing things by thinking along those lines. Or whoever phrased it this way to you is limiting themselves. I would call it a stunted, a regressive form that hopefully will then lead them to, if their path takes them there, to understanding that power is not what this is about, because that's where you're really going to begin to be able to come into mastery. So that's a red flag. Another red flag here is like, if you're good at it fast versus someone who's slow, you're quantifying things in a way that doesn't really matter. So that's questionable. Why does it matter if someone's faster or slower than someone else? Again, we can't take any of it with us. I don't even know what temporal schema you're applying there, how much it matters. But as far as being able to pull and route energies, overall, no. If someone uses sigil craft over and over and refines it and applies it and repeats it and practices it for many years or times or what have you, as many years and as many times as the person doing, say, years of an initiated formal order work, like a Freemasonic or Western magical order, like a Hermetic order, or Rosicrucian order, then they can be, as what's being poorly worded here, as powerful as each other, all else being equal. If they're both doing it as much or in the same way, it's a very hard thing to wrap my mind around. Again, simply because it's going to depend on the person doing these things. But then, would the ability to usefully apply a sigil be the same between those two practitioners? Sure. Then yes, both would be able to use a sigil well after, spending time practicing and all else being equal. But again, it's a very strange question. It's not really asking. It's very inauthentic, because saying almost like you can get rid of all initiated or formal magic and just do sigil work. Again, this feels very backhanded to me, because one, you don't have to be involved in formal magic or initiated magics to become an amazing occultist. That's, I wouldn't say that's true. And it's almost like this question assumes that's what we're attacking the idea of. And I wouldn't say that that's true in the first place, and that one's not trying to be the other to begin with. But then there's also this aspect of, can you do this one skill and somehow you're a better magician and it's somehow applicable to what is actually a group of skills? Because that's what a formal order does, or even if you're doing, say, an initiate training individualistically, I would want to say that, but alone by yourself, and you're not involved in like a formal order, but you're doing like a formal hermetic initiation system, there's so much more going on there than just sigil magic. So they're not equatable in any sense. There's a lot you're never going to harness or evolve from just doing sigil work and only sigil work. So what's an easier way to think of this? It's like suggesting that there are two chefs and we're going to call them both chefs. But what's actually going on is one spent years learning to be a chef, alone or in a group. It doesn't matter which, but they spent years learning to be a chef and really applied themselves to becoming a chef. And whether or not they used a specific, traditional method or not, again, doesn't matter. But then this other person that we're calling chef, learned how to grill really well. Just grill. And that's it. Just how to grill really well. Just that one aspect of this much larger sphere of knowledge. And so, and maybe the grill individual, they did it faster because they happen to have a natural talent for it, perhaps. So they just grill really, really well. And very quickly, they became this really great griller versus this other person who took years to become a really great chef. And then, so do you then say that the person who can grill well is just as good, just as, humbly useful to their current evolutionary status on this planet, that they are just as powerful a chef as the other person? No, of course not, right? Because they're not a chef. Because the other person is actually a chef. They learned all of the skills, or at least attempted to learn the skills. So like how to grill and knife skills and saucier skills and spicing skills and how to clean food and how to prepare food and how to clean counters and make sure that people don't get sick from, sanitization practices, and how to maintain different utensils and different pieces of equipment within their kitchen, how to then plate the food, how to time different aspects of a meal and how that meal comes together in conjunction to go with all these things like color presentation, portion ratio, flambeing, curing, reducing, right? So the list is endless over here in chef land. The person that decided to take on a full cohesive structure of what they wanted to become, right? They're learning everything so that it can be brought into this holism. That's what we'd call a chef. That's what we'd call a magician, or, a full witch, or a full shaman, or however you phrase it. But that's learning magic. The other person is just grilling. They're just doing sigils. And maybe they're a great griller, sure, but that's still not a chef. You might gain access to some magic through just sigil craft. Absolutely, because it's very powerful. But that still doesn't make you a chef. That just makes you a great griller. It just makes you very good at sigils. So you're not even a pit master. Like in the grilling metaphor, right? Like if you haven't learned how to blend spices or how to make a good barbecue sauce with hickory, or like how to do a good rub, what the effects of different, wood, exterior wood sourcing has then on the flavor of what you're grilling. Like if you're using different types of woods at different types of temperatures for different durations, right? But so all they know is grilling, right? Like just that piece of food on top of that grill and how to do that one aspect of that thing. That's not the same thing as a chef. It's the same thing with claiming that someone who's good at sigils, or just good at a ritual, or just really, really good at visualization, just good at meditation, just good at chakra work, just good at astral projecting, as if you can somehow just do that one thing. First of all, absolutely you can. You can just do that one thing and no one should be judging you for it. But that's not the same thing. It's not somehow comparable to someone, or nor should it be compared to someone who's, growing into cohesive magics and their application on this self and this much, they're doing all of those things, because they're just not, there's not the same thing. The two aren't comparable. And certainly there is no accounting for why anyone would want to create, I'm assuming, a blurb or a soundbite claiming that one is just as good as the other. Like wherever this question of yours came from, of can you just do sigil magic and be more powerful than a 5-year initiate of a formal order, that's a soundbite. That's someone trying to sell you something. That's someone trying to, and you knew it. You knew it when you heard it. That's when you're asking it, why you're asking about it, right? It sounds like a convenient way to convince people that there's an easy way out. And right there, the alarm bell should be going off in your head, right? Why is someone trying to convince you that you are less capable of full evolution, and they're trying to give you an escape system you don't need, right? And because you should just seek fast results? Why? Why shouldn't you seek every talent, every skill, honing every single ability that you have? Why shouldn't that require work? Why would someone deny you that, or claim that that it's somehow better to not partake in the feast versus one bite of bread, right? Like, when does that ever sound like good advice? You know that you are wondrous, enchanting, exactly in this moment who you are meant to be. That is true. That, if we're going to talk about truth, that is a truth. The universe is the universe, and that you are part of that dynamic is a truth. You're an intuitive soul. You know when something sounds disingenuous or perhaps ignorant of greater truths. And I think you heard that somewhere, which is why you're asking these questions. So is it true that initiation systems don't teach you to control your subconscious? Okay, see, these questions, I read this before I read the full email. So the third question here is it true that initiation systems don't teach you to control your subconscious? I don't know where you're hearing this. No. No, that isn't true. That's exactly what initiation systems do. Even when they're doing it in ways we can't fully perceive, having to do with, which runes are inside of our auras, or which parts of a ritual are gaining access to parts of our subconscious mind that we are guarding ourselves against without an awareness of that. Sometimes you need a great avatar to help you get to a place where you can even become aware. But that's what initiate systems do. And I'm not saying initiate systems are the only way to do magic, or the only way to become great at magic, or the only way to seek self-mastery. They're not. But that is what initiation systems do. They teach you to control your subconscious. So it's almost like someone's telling you the antithesis of what those structures actually are. Teaching the novice, the initiate, mastery of themselves, their subconscious mind, the way they perceive to be free of conditioning and willfully choose how to evolve. That is what initiatory ritual magic does. But it's also, what I feel like this is so confining. So that's also what great ancient, shamanistic series of practices does or can do. What great Alexandrian Wiccan coven circles and practices can do. It's what Egyptian methodology that could be applied completely alone, with no exterior system, initiate system, no group involved, maybe completely informally if you are habitualistic about it. That is what those things can do. So it doesn't necessarily require a temple practice or even a coven circle, but all these things can do that. They all teach you to control your subconscious. I don't know why someone would claim that they don't. That's what they're made to do. There are so many wonderful forms of occultism. This just seems like maybe you are hearing someone or reading something that's trying to be inflammatory because then it's more exciting for the listeners. It's like clickbait. This is right. So that's what all occultism is at its core. However you're approaching it, it is a system or series of practices applied formally or informally, with initiation rites or without them, alone or in a group, to give you self-mastery, to gain access to your subconscious and gain control of it. So is it true that initiation systems don't teach you to control your subconscious? Absolutely not. Until next time.